Well, well, well. Somebody commented on my I've been on YouTube for 10 years video. This isn't an Alice in Wonderland channel? And now it looks like it very much is. But this is actually a Star Frontiers video, so let's talk about that. Welcome to another Down the Rabbit Hole video. We're talking Star Frontiers, but this is actually a little bit of a... This is because something else happened. I thought, maybe I need to do a thing. Let me explain first of all. I had planned to do a different video than this, where I talked about my Hummas again. I have already done a video about my Hummas and how they were this evil, imperial, very nasty bunch of guys, which I think might have been unique compared to the way other people handled Hummas in their campaigns. And I found a really timely reason to go with a little bit more of a deep dive into my Hummas. And I started filming this one where I was in Rome and having grapes, and I got talking about my Hummas because they were based on Roman legionnaires and senators. It was like there was a parallel between my Hummas and the Romans. And the reason I say that was timely is because I based my Humma culture, my entire Humma world, on the movie Caligula, which is a racy, dicey, a film of some repute, let's put it that way. And in my video, I did a real deep dive because, as it turns out, there is a recreation, reformat, reboot of the original 1979 Caligula, starring Malcolm McDowell and Helen Mirren and all the rest of them, that came out, I think, a year ago or so on streaming. I think you can buy it on Blu-ray. And it's Caligula, the Ultimate Cut, where they took all of the problematic original porno version of the 70s and the way pared down theatrical cut that kind of passed the censors because the original film was way too X-rated to be released in theaters. Did a whole video. I went into a deep dive about that. But in proofreading that video, wait a minute, let me back up. So, again, there's a new version of Caligula out, which I haven't seen yet. But I did my video about, Caligula really messed up my Hummas. Like, that was going to be the video. I based a lot of my Humma imperialistic, nasty society on what you see in the Caligula film. And I thought, oh, look at me, I'm being all edgy, and I'm gonna set it to you straight. But a couple of problems. As I say, in proofreading the video, I came across as a real pervert, and I just thought, no. And there was stuff in that video I wasn't really liking. No. And as a result, I have axed that video. I'm not going to put it up. Now, it still exists. If people are really wanting me to, maybe I'll release it, but I'll cut bits out. I don't know. It's kind of for the Star Frontiers community. Do you want to hear me go into my Hummas being based on Malcolm McDowell's nasty Caligula performance? Short version lesson from that video was going to be, hey, there's a new Ultimate Cut out, check it out, and then you'll see why my Hummas were so nasty. That was where I was going with it. But I thought, in proofreading it, wow, I come across real... You don't want to be knowing that side of my personality. And B, I've already talked about the Hummas. I've gone at length already about them. You know about my Hummas. And I've also talked about, these are all creatures from the Zebulon's Guide to Frontier Space. I've kind of touched on each of them. I talked about the Ifschnits, how I wasn't a fan of little humans. I mean, they're dwarf-like and stuff, and they have, weird eyelash stuff. But basically, they're little dudes. They're little human beings running around. So I don't like humanoid aliens. So when I talked about the aliens that I created for my campaign, I made a different type of Ifschnit. I made a little owl-like creature. And I did a little discussion. It was sort of based on these cavemen characters that Doctor Who encountered once, the Tom Baker era. I wish I could find that episode. I'd love to show you a clip, but regardless. So I touched on the Ifschnits as well. And the Mechanons, which came with Zebulon's Guide to Frontier Space, I didn't include them because in my version, and this is a bit spoilery, if you play the Volturnus built-in modules that come with Star Frontiers, the Mechanons are part of that, is all I will say. And in my campaign, I tweaked the Volturnus modules a little bit, changed them around. I didn't like how how Volturnus was originally published. And in my version of the campaign, the Mechanons were wiped out. So there were no Mechanons to have as a player race. And I always thought, playable machines, I don't know how that would work. In the hands of a really good role player, yes. I don't really think I could make that work as a campaign. So I didn't have Mechanons in my campaign. Which means there is one alien left in Zebulon's Guide to Frontier Space that I haven't really touched on. And it is a noteworthy race that I think I need to make amends. So rather than tell you how Caligula screwed my Hummas, I think instead it's time for me to talk about my Osakar. So, the Osakar were the fourth new race in the Zebulon's Guide to Frontier Space. And I looked at the design, and I wasn't thrilled at first. I thought, okay, they're not humanoid, but they're human-ish. They've got legs, torso, arms, head, neck. But I suppose there were admirable qualities to the design that I thought, okay, I don't normally go for humanoid aliens, but maybe I'll let this one slide because it's different enough. They have 4 legs, not just 2. They have a big, long, snake-like neck. They have multiple joints and multiple knuckles in their fingers and their thumbs. So they have these like bizarre-looking palms and stuff. And a really neat feature that kind of made me think, okay, TSR has done some thought. They pondered this race before they just threw it out there, unlike the Ifschnitz. They are very tall. They're like 3 meters tall. Big, long, gangly, plant-like white aliens. But they actually put a line in there, because I'm sure somebody must have thought, ooh, there's going to be scenarios where they have to duck their head. The characters have to get into somewhere small. Or jump into a car. How are you going to have a 9 or 10 foot tall, 3 meters, is that 9 feet? Yeah. How are you going to have a 10 foot tall creature jump into a Jeep? That type of thing. And so the writers actually said, because of these double jointed arms and legs that the Osakar have, they can actually sort of cantilever themselves to shorter height. And I thought, okay, you know what? I don't mind that. So we're kind of talking walking umbrellas in a way. Okay, I'm going to keep the Osakars in. I like them. I like what you're doing. And at first I didn't like the face. I thought it's way too human. Okay, sure, they say it's flat and it's got a weird tongue and nose structure so that they sound very fluty. And I thought, oh, it might work. But 2 eyes, a mouth, and a nose it's really hitting very human, until I saw J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movie from 2007, whenever his first Star Trek film came out. Young Kirk and Leonard Nimoy's Spock go to an icy world and they meet up with Scotty, and Scotty has a little companion, Keenzer. Now, Keenzer is a humanoid, like little guy in a suit. Don't get me wrong, we're talking standard Star Trek creatures, but the face, I remember looking at it and going, that's kind of an Osakar face. Yeah. There's a little moment of Star Frontiers clarity for me. There's kind of a Star Frontiers reference. Not that I'm sure J.J. Abrams' crowd was thinking that, but I just thought, yeah, if I was to peg, what would it look like to speak face-to-face with an Osakar? Keenzer. That's kind of it. So I accepted the Osakars, and I thought, or Osakar, sorry. People have corrected me on my use of plural for some of these aliens, and it definitely says in Zebulon's Guide, the plural of Osakar is Osakar. And in a way, that's actually representative of their species. They all, because they're plant-like, They're not mammals, they're more vegetation. But in an alien weird way. They have this sort of reptilian skin, but they're not reptiles. They are all identical to each other. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting. And it mentions in their society and customs section, their society is built on that very idea. They all view each other equally. It is an egalitarian species. And I thought, that's interesting. We got some material to work with. This is a weird race, not just a guy in a suit. Okay, keep talking to me. What else have we got here? They have unique voices. You can't, they are very, very different sounding from each other. And they love individuality. They want to be expressing each one's creativity. And they did mention, this is the 80s, right? I mean, they did mention the Osakar will dress up in crazy outfits of even from eras of bygone times. And I just thought to myself, today, if I was to see that, I would think, so they're a species of drag queens? Is that what we're talking? That's kind of cool. That's got some interesting, what do you want to talk about? How can you describe it? That's got some flair in it that I hadn't really anticipated. Imagine a bunch of, hardened soldiers going into the marsh to fight the evil creature that's hiding beneath the wrecked spaceship. And one of them comes out looking like they're straight off the catwalk. And I just thought, okay, this sounds like a really weird race. And in my version, this is why we're here having the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. My version, I was kind of like, and the more I thought about my version of the Osakar, I thought, yeah, they are nuts. They are really this C.S. Lewis Carroll, like, crazy bunch of creatures. And it's in the book. It's in the rules. But I took one element of the Osakar and I ran with it in a way that I wonder if you guys did too. Because there's a lot of Osakar weirdness. I want to ask, how did you guys handle them? In my case, something struck me about individuality. I thought, yeah, if you all look the same as each other, what are you going to do as a society? How are you going to... What impact does that have if everybody is a clone of each other? You're all the same height. You're all the same look. What's that going to do? And I think I remember watching some old commercial or something where two women kind of run into the room and they're both wearing the same outfit and they're outraged at each other. And I thought, yeah, wait a minute. The Osakar like to dress up in weird outfits. What if for them, being as different as possible from each other is their number one priority? Yeah, that's got some potential. Let's do that. Let's have our Osakar be this mad... I'm going to dress like crazy. I'm going to think like crazy. I'm going to act like crazy. And that led to a really nasty fight against an Osakar, which I will go to in a little bit. But let me set the stage. I remember thinking to myself, okay, so the Osakar are motivated by difference, change, individuality. As it says in the rule book, they don't want to have any, or they will wear outfits from different time periods as long as it makes them look different. And I thought, yeah, okay, we got it here. This is working for me. Now, a couple other things out of the rule book. And I'm curious if any of the other Star Frontiers referees out there did this. They are asexually reproducing like a plant. Like they lay eggs. And whereas in any role-playing game, I'm sure the players choose at some point, I would like to have a child. I and the princess will stop for a few years and in the kingdom we will have our family, or whatever the setting is. Maybe you're playing Boot Hill and you're the old ranger out in the Wild West and you decide, no, I'm going to settle down on the range and we're going to have some kids. Maybe that is something that you have handled in your role-playing game. But it's usually your player's choice to say, yeah, I'm going to stop adventuring and I'm going to raise a family. Great. Awesome stuff. It's your choice. The Osakar lay eggs, and I would imagine with any kind of... Mother Nature seems to have everything programmed that when you're at your physical prime, now is the time to procreate. now is the time to lay those eggs. So let's say you're in your 20s, and I know Osakar lived like 200 years, but whatever your age is, you're no longer in the state-run system education or whatever the heck it is. You are now an individual thrust out into the world, having your adventures. And as far as Mother Nature and the genetic code is concerned, I'm sure she's like, well, time for that. Time to start laying them eggs, baby. So it never happened. I had a couple of Osakar players in my campaign. The campaign didn't run for years on end. Like, it's not like we ran into that as a plot device ever. But I would like to know, for your Osakar players, did anybody decide, now is the time for me to lay an egg? Or did you actually impose that on your players? Hey, it's your time of the year, whatever way you want to word it. You are now gonna procreate. And I mean, Star Trek dealt with this. You know, you had Spock in Amok time. I gotta be the salmon swimming back up the river. I gotta spawn. There is a precedent here for a really good bit of drama and excitement and adventure. But it also has a tendency to impact. Like, if you're suddenly gonna have to look after a baby, even if it comes out a clone of yourself, obviously be a bit smaller, it has to grow. But like, how does the Osakar society work? I know that in the case of birds, when the eggs hatch, the chicks are looked after for a while and then eventually they fly and, you know, life goes on. I believe some species, is it alligators? Toads? I can't remember. There's some species where when they're born, they're little miniature versions of their parents, but they just go off. Spiders? Yeah, spiders are a good one. They just crawl off out of the egg and away they go. They go do their thing. Is that how you handled Osakar procreation? Your players were like, well, maybe as the DM, referee, did you say, okay, it's time for you to have a baby? But the good news is, you take a little while, and it's good because we've got a lull in the adventure right now, and boom, you lay a couple of eggs, and you make sure nothing attacks them. You take care of them in your apartment. And then they crack open. You may give them names if you so desire, whatever. They kind of flops around and like, oh, I think I can stand. All right. And then, well, cheerio. Have a good life. Like, is that... It's an interesting part of the adventure, that the reality. If one of the greatest things about pen and paper role-playing games is that way back before we had virtual reality headsets or video games with incredibly realistic graphics, the great thing about pen and paper role-playing games is they were a virtual reality that had consequences you hadn't intended, aren't related to the story, but now you've got to come up with a thing, like as a referee, how do you handle this reality that is inconvenient to the adventure? Because these creatures are kind of genetically disposed to lay an egg. Do you just put the kibosh on that? Is there like, do they have some version of kind of like birth control where it's like, okay, I'm in the middle of like a big raid on a pirate outpost that's going to take a year or so. I'm going to take some supplements to inhibit the egg laying process because that's going to distract me from the rest of the players, or the rest of my adventuring party. I'm going to have to put the kibosh on any eggs for a while. Did you do that? There's a whole element to Osakar life that I just thought, man, this is something I hadn't really ever thought about. And again, if my campaign, Daryl played an Osakar and he did a great job. Kudos to Daryl. I don't think anybody else played them. Maybe Alan. I think he tried it once. None of those adventures lasted big, long stretches of time, so it wasn't ever a factor. But I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to have to tackle the egg thing at some point, and I'd love to know, how did you? Now, what that meant for my Osakar, if anybody ever encountered an NPC one, you could run the gamut of any kind of response from this person. They could be very helpful, a little nutty, but very helpful. They could be cowards, because that's different. I want to be different. I'm going to do something that nobody else has done. I'm going to run away and hide. okay, that's unexpected. Or were they frightening? Because that happened in one of our campaigns. I've talked about there was one adventure where my characters were all on Port Lorraine, on Gran Rivera, the big city, the big Blade Runner city. And there was some adventure, I do not recall what it was, but the players were finding pieces that, it was a little treasure hunt, fetch quest type of adventure. And one of the pieces they were looking for, one of the fetches they were doing, was to find a blimp that was flying around between the buildings of Port Lorraine. And when they encountered it, I took a page out of 2000 AD, which I've talked about before. This is Prague 543 from 1989? October 87, 1987. And I said, this is the blimp that you encounter. I'll show a higher, nicer version of it so you can see it here. My players boarded this blimp because it had a little landing pad, little structure on top with some buildings and stuff. And they went in and they were looking for whatever the heck it was. I can't remember what they were looking for, but they went in and tried finding the item. Unbeknownst to them, this blimp, and because it's a little weird looking, it should have clued in, it was run by an Osakar who was maniacal and diabolical and weird. I think he called himself the Puppet Master, I think. When they encountered him, another little reference that I borrowed from 2000 AD was Torquemada from Nemesis the Warlock. I loved his look, especially the way Kevin O'Neill used to draw him. And I thought, yeah, when they saw the Osakar, he was wearing a helmet mask thing like that, and it scared the bejesus out of my players. They were like, what have we encountered? We're on a blimp in a Blade Runner city, and this guy is running the blimp? What? Okay. And first thing he does is start fighting them, start shooting up and all this kind of stuff. And they're firing and they're dodging and they're jumping from building to building and they're trying to get away from this guy because I can't remember what weapon he had, but it was nasty. And the funniest thing was, it was one of the few times I used the hollow screen, defense screen. And the setting that I had was to place a copy of the Osakar bad guy about 4 feet to the right of where he really was. So my players were laying into this guy with bullets and laser beams and everything else. And he was absorbing the damage, no problem, because he's actually 4 feet to the left. And he's shooting back, and they're like, whoa, what is this Osakar's magical power? He's taking all this damage, he's not getting hurt. But it was one moment, and I think I had my players make an intuition check or perception check for this. He decided to draw them into his chambers so that he would have an even better chance to fight them. And he kind of turned and ran into an elevator and went downstairs. And I think Alan made his perception check. Yes, he did, because I remember describing, there's something weird about how he ran into that elevator shaft. And Alan was like, okay, what do you mean weird? Well, it's like he was out of position. And I try my best to describe, because we know what's going on, I explain exactly what it is. So you got your character, and he pivots and runs into an elevator, but he's got a hologram of himself 4 feet this way, right? So when he turns, suddenly he's swinging in a weird way, and then he runs into an elevator, and he goes down the elevator, and so does his thing, but his image is like maybe on the edge of the wall. And I think that was their first clue of like, hey, wait a minute. There's something not right here. So I think they started switching to like gas grenades and other types of, area of effect weaponry. Because they're like, hey, we're throwing lots of bullets into this guy. He's not getting hurt. Then they eventually defeated him. And they started going through his blimp of like, what is with this guy? And I was like, he's an Osakar. They are motivated to be different. I remember there was like a series of switches with like all this chain system above, and what it was is you would pull the levers and make it would form a binary code, and when you figured out the correct word, and I can't remember where the word was hidden, but when you created this hexadecimal code number or letter word, whatever it was, it would open up the chest with all the good stuff in it. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm so clever. The word, I can't remember what it was, but like it's hidden deep in the depths of this guy's psyche. Okay, we got to go look through his books. His books were full of bizarre rantings, page after page. I even printed up one vague example of his just, it sounded like madness spewing forth. And it's worth noting, I was reading a lot of H.P. Lovecraft at the time, so I was like infusing a lot of H.P. Lovecraft into my campaigns. So I had this like maddening book full of crazy ramblings. And I wrote one page and I said, imagine a telephone book full of pages like this. And they read it and they're like, what is with this guy? He's an Osakar. They are crazy. They are different. Anything to be different. And then, yeah, what was it? So yes, I will say, unfortunately, Alan defeated me with logic with that little pulley system trick thing, because he was just like, well, if it's only, I can't remember, let's say 20 different pulleys, I'll just do up, down, 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 up. I'll go through every variation until I unlock the thing. And we actually did the math on that, and that didn't end up taking that long. I think it was like, we did calculations of, okay, if it's going to take this long to do this and this long to do that, how many different variations till you accidentally stumble across it? And I think it was like 3 hours. So he just spent 3 hours doing it. I was like, all right, fine. Whatever code replicated what we were looking for, boom, the door opens and you get all the cool stuff out of the blimps. Whatever. Anyway, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Those are my Osakar, those crazy creatures that have a bizarre biology, a bizarre psychology, and were really quite a well-deserved, unexpected turn for me. I wasn't going to have them at first. When I first looked at them in the book, I was like, no, another humanoid alien, are you kidding me? But they're different enough, and they are different enough that I thought, okay, yes, I will keep the Osakar in my campaign as is, and I really enjoyed them. They were a neat foil, a neat random element of craziness that I thought, okay, yeah, let's put these guys in my campaign. So I'm going to wrap it up there. How did you handle your Osakar? How nutty were your guys? Or were they kind of, you kept them in the sort of normal territory, unlike me? I loved going crazy over the top with nutty ideas. Gonna leave it there. Until next time, I'll see you down the rabbit hole.